Do we have a determination of legal notice?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a director's report?
Madam Chair, I do not have a director's report. I pretty much summarized everything at the last meeting, but I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Okay. There is no consent calendar. Oh, wait, matters from the public. We'll open the public hearing for that. Seeing no one, we'll close it again. No consent calendar, so we will move on to GP 2013-002/OA. 2013-001.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Bill Kinzer. I'm a senior planner in Fort Bragg office.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you all. So the request before you on your agenda is a report and make a recommendation regarding substantial changes to the Mendocino Town Local Coastal Plan Amendment, General Plan Amendment 213-002, and Ordinance Amendment 213-001, reflecting the zoning districts, zoning code, amending the Town Code Division 3, Title 20, that were considered by the Board of Supervisors since you've last seen it on.
Is your mic not on?
Considered by the Board of Supervisors since you've last seen it in 2014 and 2015, and then seen by the California Coastal Commission in this past year. And the California Coastal Commission at first denied what we had submitted and then made suggested modifications, and with those suggested modifications recommended approval or certification of the plan. We've provided for you today a Appendix A and Appendix B, which we're not going to go through page by page unless you want to. I think the Appendix B is 320 pages with markups. But those contain the changes to the Mendocino Town Land Use Plan and the markups of the changes to the zoning ordinance, as well as the adopted the town land use map and the zoning code, the zoning map. The board, I won't mention, but this the Board of Supervisors is tentatively scheduled to hear this in October. As a parent, if you've had a chance to look through Exhibits A and B, there are a substantial number of changes to the plan. And those are shown, as you've seen, in the cross-out and underline, and the heavy cross-out and underline are changes, suggested modifications by the Coastal Commission. The plan has undergone fairly substantial changes. We have new sections entirely that deal with public access, parking, water quality protection. A lot of these are things that were needed to be in the plan originally, but weren't in '92. They mimic other elements of the coastal element, particularly the public access is similar to what we have in Division 2. Water quality protection is similar to some of the ordinance that we have adopted also. There have also been substantially modified sections, many new definitions added, a lot of them having to do with water quality protection. We've also brought in the environmentally sensitive habitat area policies from Division 2 almost in total with just minor changes. So that makes those environmentally sensitive habitat area policies consistent between Division 2 and Division 3. Formerly, we referenced back to Division 2 on that for the rest of the coastal zone. I would like to note that despite the substantial number of changes, the actual changes to the zoning districts and for nuts and bolts things like building height or setback areas, what's allowed and what's not allowed, those things have not been modified very much. So we think that on a day-to-day implementation of this, that it will be similar to what we've been doing already. We have other sections that will kick in certain circumstances, such as public access and water quality, but on a day-to-day, the operation of the MHRB and the Coastal Permit Administrator will be similar. Yeah. The Coastal Commission staff, and I just want to reference this, had recommended what they identified as 5 significant or substantial changes, disagreements with what we had submitted. Those were visitor serving facilities, demonstration of adequate water supply, the land use designation and zoning change district from open space to public facilities on the Grindle Park property, optional zoning, which was in reference to the Yellow House just north of the Mendocino Market, which is currently split zoned, and then change in principally permitted, and conditionally permitted uses. We reached agreement on the demonstration of adequate water supply with the Coastal Commission. We also reached agreement on optional zoning, which I'll go through briefly for the yellow property, and also agreed with the changes on principally permitted uses, and conditional uses, those changes. The 2 areas where the Coastal Commission suggested modifications went through that were not as we submitted were visitor serving facilities, and the main point was to require a coastal development permit for those properties that added units in 1992 or beyond that aren't without a coastal development permit, and that would be required. And then the second change was the Grindle Park property, where the recommendation was to change it to public facilities from open space, and they did not agree with that change, and so the suggested modifications are that it goes back to open space. In terms of changes to the map, I'd just like to, if you can follow my arrow here quickly, we have this open space area was formerly forest lands. That's just the park property right down here near the big river.
Gotcha.
In this
there
area
it-
here. So
Yeah,
it's-
if you don't move it, I don't see it.
Okay, there we go, right there. And that's
Yeah.
just a change to reflect that that's part of the Mendocino Headlands State Park. And so having it in forest lands, having it in open space makes a lot more sense. This was the Grindle Park property. The request was to change it to public facilities. It's remaining in open space.
Oh, I'm not seeing it.
Right there.
You need your laser deal.
I don't have my laser.
You got my arm.
Yeah.
This is a similar property as the MCCSD property, Mendocino City Community Services District. The request on that was to change it from open space to public facilities. That change was made. This was the Yellow House property, which had split zoning between residential and commercial, and it is now all commercial, which is we think is a good thing. And then finally, on something that we brought to the commission, to the Coastal Commission directly, and this is the change from commercial on these 2 properties, that little at the bottom of Lansing Street and Main Street. There's that open space with the eucalyptus trees on it. So the Rotary Club wants to make that into a park, and if it was commercial, that wouldn't have been allowed to happen. And so we were able to get that change done at the Coastal Commission hearing.
So it's open space now, or?
Actually, it's public facilities now, and then we made an amendment to community recreation to recognize the 2 parcels that's comprised of. That summarizes very briefly some of the overall major changes, the major additions to it, to the plan and to the zoning, the map changes. The environmental determination is that pursuant to certain sections, preparation, approval, and certification of a local coastal program, such as the Mendocino Town plan amendment is exempt from the requirements for preparation of environmental impact report because the Coastal Commission's review serves that purpose. With that, we have a recommended motion for the Planning Commission. The motion has 3 parts to it, and pardon me.
Not to cut it, Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, not to cut off Bill Kinzer, but for the motion, I think we could actually shorten that because the motion is reflecting what the resolution is actually doing, if I'm correct. So the motion could simply be adopt resolution prepared by staff.
Does anyone have any questions for staff?
Not a big deal, but on page 4.13-9, in the second paragraph, or the first full paragraph, what is a braided California coastal trail? I didn't know what braided meant.
I'm not sure of that.
Anybody know what a braided trail is?
I know what a braided stream channel is.
It's a,
Yeah.
That must be what it is. I bet it is. You know,
I think
it's
it's
where
more-
all those little paths are.
More than one, not just one linear path, but
Yeah.
a couple of them.
Okay, yeah. I
and
just-
so you have multiple trails on the headlands there that
Yeah, there's
go in-
some that
go
are
in
more
and out,
inland, and they
I
do
just-
kind of crisscross around.
I'm not familiar with that term either.
This is graded trail?
Braided.
Braided.
Oh, braided.
Yeah, I was wondering if
Oh,
it was
wait.
a misspelling, but.
No.
And it appears
Braided,
multiple
okay.
times throughout the
Got it.
document, so maybe it would just warrant a definition or clarification.
Just so people will know what it is. That wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. The timeline for applying for these newly required CDP for visitor serving, I think was pretty quick. It was December of this coming December.
2000, I think it's changed to 2018.
So that's still just a year and something away. Will that be enough time, do you think, for those people to process?
It appeared to me in reviewing it that it was enough time,
Yeah.
that to be noticed, then the people will be aware that they need to have a complete application submitted by that. I'll double check that date, and then they have 6 months from the time of completed application. We have 6 months to process that and get it to a public hearing.
And you think that would be okay?
I think that, yes, I do.
Okay, good. And then I wondered, there was mention again of the ordinance for in lieu parking fees or the in lieu parking fee account. Will that require an ordinance to implement?
I believe that will, yes.
Uh-huh. And do we know, has there been discussion at the board level of supporting that?
Yeah, I don't recall what was said back in 2015, but this is something that we can bring up at the board when this goes forward next month.
Good.
It would be kind of good if they had a plan of how they were going to implement the use of those fees.
Right.
And that there really was going to be a remote parking lot in some system, you know.
And then there were a couple of sections that just needed a little fixing, and maybe they're already fixed, but
Could be,
if we have time, can I just go through those?
surely.
Okay. One is page 4.13-54. And there's a repeated paragraph.
Oh, yes, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, you got that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then on page 4.13-102, I think it was misstated. Action S-2.1 says all development applications shall submit proof of an adequate water supply throughout the year, including the dry season, and that well production of groundwater will deplete the groundwater table and will have a significant
Yeah, that probably
direct or
wants to be
cumulative.
not.
So I think we want a not in each of those second parts of that sentence. Both 1 and 2 should start with not deplete and not have a significant direct or cumulative adverse effect. You got that? Okay,
We'll
good.
look at that.
And, let's see. Then on page 13-69, there is a note that public notice requirements for CDPs have been expanded and other applications like to MHRB. Do you know in what way that public notice has been expanded?
The public notice for the MHRB has been expanded to include notification of the Coastal Commission of the meeting.
Oh,
That's the most significant on that.
okay.
The other change that I saw was that we were recommending that notice be given to properties within, I think it's 100 feet of an MHRB action, and that's something that the MHRB has wanted and we've been implementing already. But there was added to that a sentence about or email.
Okay. Great. I think that's all I had.
And I'd
Thank
like
you.
to check the date on that, it seemed to me when I read through it that there was sufficient time for folks to get their
Yeah.
application in. And then I know, I'm for sure on the 6 months.
It may have been very adequate at one point, but, you know, so much time's gone
That's
by.
a good point.
I mean, I'm pretty amazed. The town plan, when it was first actually
I'm
formulated.
sure that date has changed a number of times.
Yeah. In 1992, and when the town zoning code was written in 1996, I was there. So that was a long time ago.
I'm curious to know how much public participation there was in this, especially the Coastal Commission. We had a lot of public participation, and the supervisors' meetings as well.
If I can, through the chair, I'll start this and then I'll defer to Bill. But when we originally started the update of the town plan, back in 2012, there was kickoff meetings for public engagement. In fact, I was still here when we did that, and the chief planner and I and one of our planners from Fort Bragg did a charrette process. And then shortly after that, the idea was to continue to do the public outreach. And it's my understanding that there was plenty of public input during the Board of Supervisors, and I'll let Bill speak to that because he was involved with it after I was gone. But even recently at the Coastal Commission, we had several members of the town of Mendocino folks that did come to the Coastal Commission hearing on June 8th. Supervisor Hamburg provided testimony to the Coastal Commission. So I would say there were maybe 3 or 4 people that spoke, but a lot of folks were told about the meeting in Arcata for the Coastal Commission. But I think by that time, it was already at a point where we were looking at certification, and we had several meetings with the Coastal Commission in early spring leading up to the Coastal Commission certification. But I'll let Bill speak to the public hearings that took place over the last few years.
Well, there have been multiple public hearings and then workshops that were held in the town of Mendocino proceeding, coming to the Board of Supervisors. I feel like the public had more than adequate opportunity for response to the comments. I can't speak exactly to the opportunities offered by the Coastal Commission, but I know the Coastal Commission was reaching out through our mailing lists to people that had shown interest in the plan, and I know in their documentation there's many letters that they received. So they received comments as well. They didn't hold in. They only held the Coastal Commission public hearing, but they did reach out prior to that hearing.
And they came to Ukiah last summer,
Well, and
right?
so there were two opportunities.
Yeah.
The first was a preliminary hearing. The changes weren't complete at that point, but they
Right.
went over the 5 significant areas were complete. They went over those, and then many of the other changes as well. And then there was some back and forth that took place between the county and the Coastal Commission on the suggested modifications that we were aware of. Some of those are shown in the changes on those 5 significant areas. And then it went back to the Coastal Commission for certification.
Yeah, and
in
I was
June.
at that Ukiah meeting, and there were a lot of coast folks that came.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
because we,
Right.
not
we
gonna
met for
introduce
hours,
to them
right?
again.
And I'm just hoping that the citizens of Mendocino are happy with, or acceptance of these changes, or at least had an input to the changes the Coastal Commission has made.
Right.
So does that sound like it's the case? You're over there.
I think so.
Okay.
I have not heard any complaints
Okay,
about this
all
new
right.
one.
And we certainly
I-
are looking at an empty room, which I'm sure we would not be if
Right.
people were up in arms.
That's a good point.
I did have one more question, and I think that the public would be happy if the answer is as it appears. And that is, there's language in the town plan section that might allow for the water tank for the fire department on the Little Lake property, the open space, Grindle Park.
Yes, so the water tank could be allowed,
Yeah.
whether it's public facilities or open space.
Right.
Minor impact utilities are a conditionally permitted use in either of those zones.
Right. So I know that was a concern of a lot of the people in Mendocino, was that would be not prohibited, and it's not, so I think that would be a good thing.
Yes, and the date is December of 2018.
18, great. Thank you.
Any other questions of staff or comments?
Well, just a comment, it's been a long road,
Yeah.
and it's nice to finally see us coming to a final product.
Yeah, it
And
is.
next
I
time, the
wish,
Coastal Commission
uh,
should provide a template. Save us all a lot of staff time.
If I
And
may,
and it will provide a bit of a template for the update of the coastal element, should that occur.
if I may, through the chair, I would like to thank Mr. Kinzer and his staff, Juliana Cherry, who have put extensive hours and time into this plan. Again, it was one of those things that Roger and I started before I left. It wasn't supposed to take this long, but obviously things, once they get into the Coastal Commission's hands, tend to drag out for a number of years. The board subcommittee, Supervisor Brown and Hamburg were very instrumental in working with the Coastal Commission and speaking with the executive director of the Coastal Commission when he was over here back in April. But again, I want to thank Bill and Juliana for all the heavy lifting that they did with this project. I mean, it's quite an effort. Quite an effort. I mean, and I look at the pounds of paper here that really reflect all that, and lots of hours spent in the evening, and lots of vacations canceled to get this thing done. And staff has done an extraordinary job on this.
Yay.
All right, thanks.
I have one item.
Yes.
It's a cleanup item in the zoning code. It's on page 253, the second paragraph. There's a reference. This is one of the few places where there aren't any changes. So it's an old reference, but it references the California Department of Fish and Game. Should be updated to California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Very good. We'll be able to make changes like that, we think, without any problem.
Very good.
Yes.
I have a couple of items, and just wanted to start off by acknowledging, like, I'm coming in at the very tail end of this, and clearly there are many, many years and a lot of process that's gone into this. But I did have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. starting in the town plan itself, page 413-126. It's the policy about it's CNS 13, the installation of solar energy systems in the town shall be consistent with the Mendocino Town LCP. And it goes on to state that PV systems should be integrated into and harmonious with building design and construction, or generally not visible from public streets or designated open space, and that those shall be preferred. So I just had a question about this, because looking at the grid of Mendocino, and just from my own familiarity, we can see that most of the streets are on roughly this east-west axis. So for putting up solar, the solar is going to be facing due south. So from any one of those streets, if you're standing on them east-west facing north, there's the potential to see solar panels. And I wouldn't want to put unnecessary restrictions on putting up solar, because I think chances are that a lot of them are going to need to be visible in order for the panels to see the sun. So I understand that we're trying to, balance the historic character, but I just wanted to raise this issue for consideration.
If I may, through the chair, having had experience with solar and working in a lot of cities as well, you put that language in there, but it's really so that staff can work with the installers and work with designers, because the technology that's used today compared to what was out there, let's say 5 years ago, there's a lot of non-reflective material, a lot of material that's low profile that can be integrated into the historic structures and even face on a south side that really wouldn't be visible unless you were specifically looking for it, but you can't integrate it into the architecture. But I mean, the language itself would give staff that ability to work with these folks. And I know there's been just an enormous amount of technology advancements over the years that, at least what I was seeing in Santa Clara County several years ago, was going from the high profile panels to the very low profile, and having the panels integrated into the roof structure, that I think everything is possible now.
Do you know if, I believe that Harvest Market at Mendoza's got solar panels approved on their roof?
Yes, they did. Harvest Market
Yeah.
adjusted their solar panels so they weren't visible from Lansing Street.
Right.
And I think we've had one other instance that's come through.
Right.
It is a balance that we're trying to achieve there between equipment or devices that are within public view. I would expect that, or anticipate that, the technology will come up pretty soon where the panels themselves are similar to roof tiles, and roof tiles could even be exempt from MHRB review and just approved if that link was made. That may be down the road a little bit, but I don't think too far, and that might be a ultimate solution to having electrical equipment or panels or so forth within the public view.
I'm one of those people that when I'm traveling, I like to see solar panels. So I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder here. And I even look for them when they're more low profile and building integrated. So I think just generally here, my comments are that I just want to make sure that we're not turning down good solar projects that are going to help with, community self-reliance and carbon footprint issues. So thank you for that response.
And I think we have limitations on that as well, as provided by the California Solar Rights Act, that the board is limited to the decrease in power of the panels, and also in increasing the cost. And if they go beyond certain amounts, I think it might be $2,000 due to the design guidelines, then we're in a sticky situation.
Okay. All right, so let's see. The second issue that I had is in the zoning ordinance itself, and it's page 26. Down at the bottom, it's in the definition section of light agriculture. It's at the very bottom of the page. And I might be missing something here, but as I read through light agriculture, it goes into quite a lot of detail about all the things that it could mean, but seems to be fairly specific to animal agriculture, making sure to include chinchillas. And what I'm not seeing in here is any inference to crops. And so it may be that crops are covered somewhere else, but I just want to make sure that if there's anybody that's doing any small-scale farming in areas that are acceptable for that in zoning districts where that may be a permitted use, that there is an allowance for it somewhere. I noticed that, let's see, in the Mendocino Open Space District, horticulture is allowed, so I thought maybe horticulture would be the crops. So I went to look up horticulture in the definition section, and it's not in there. It's not defined. So it may be an oversight in here, or it may be my own oversight, but I just wanted to check into that and see where crop agriculture may fit in.
That's a good point. I hadn't noticed that before, and this section itself has not been substantially amended from previous. I don't see that many cross-out and underlines on it.
I'm just, as I think about the impacts to, let's say I was living next door to someone engaging in light agriculture, and if they had, chickens and bees and a cow versus crops seem quieter to me, especially in a town setting like this where you're not really going to be running big tractors.
Crap, well, that's quieter.
It depends on what?
The crop.
It does depend on the crop, but anyhow, I don't want to overlook crops.
Okay.
Thank you.
I wonder if the community garden use that is a permitted use in, I think, all of these zonings,
Yes,
even
it is.
commercial.
That's true.
Would that be crops?
That could include, yes.
Maybe that would be helpful to.
It could be. I'm thinking specifically of the urban farmer, and I don't know if they exist in Mendocino, but there's certainly a movement for urban farming, and so I just don't want to squeeze those folks out without having it, explicitly addressed.
So my question is, if it's not mentioned as an exclusion or it's prevented, then does that mean it is permitted automatically? Because I'm not remembering the exact wording on the animal thing, but it's more of a restriction than allowing it.
I mean,
I think they want everybody's roosters not to go off at
Yeah,
5 a.m. as
yeah.
a tourist
most
place,
of the districts in town are residential, and a garden associated with a house or something like that in a residential district would be an accessory use to the house. There wouldn't be any limitations on gardening on a property, and there are very few vacant properties left in the town. I don't think there's a worry about people being able to grow crops there, but I see your point.
Okay. Yeah, and my goal here is not to unnecessarily regulate crops. That would actually be contrary to what I would want to see be accomplished. But sometimes the codes get interpreted by individuals. I've seen it happen before where if it's not explicitly listed, they say, we're sorry that's not allowed. And so I just wouldn't want to see an urban farmer be squeezed out by it not being listed here as a permitted use.
And may I add something to that? The RR2 zoning might be more appropriate for row crops and I think that is listed in the RR description. I know it is inland. I haven't looked in this one actually, but maybe we could check that. Because usually RRs allow for some ag production. I'm just not sure where to find that right now. Let's see.
Pardon me. Well, we do have, as you mentioned, we do have community gardens listed in practically every zoning district. And in the yeah, light agriculture is in the MRR districts. It's allowed. And then you would have, in other areas, I think you'd have community gardens, so
Okay, great.
be allowed. And then it would be an accessory use to a single family anyway, so.
Perfect. Thank you. That's it for me.
Might want to let Greg get back from my pit stop, but then I think we're ready for a motion.
Chair Holcamp?
Yes.
So Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, I've been trying to make a list of what direction to give to staff on a few of these issues to add to the motion, to add to the resolution, and I can read those out later. I think the one regarding the not, adding the word not, while it seems obvious, I think we just make sure with the Coastal Commission that they're aware of that, didn't get added, and they'll have no problem with that being changed between now and the board meeting. And so any other requests I wouldn't have worried too much about of not adding to the ordinance, but that's a pretty major oversight to not have the word not where we're seeing
Yeah.
it. So I wanted to try and call that out in the resolution itself. So I can read that out when we're ready.
Okay. I believe we're ready for a motion. Unless there are any more comments.
Oh, there's the recommended motion.
Pipe right up, Steve. I've gotten myself unsorted here now.
Through the chair, Commissioner Hall is looking at me, Deputy County Counsel, intently for the motion. So I could recommend that alter the motion be the recommended motion is to adopt the resolution as prepared by staff and with the following changes. Paragraph 3 of the therefore be it resolved clause currently ends with as modified by suggested by the California Coastal Commission. I would add the clause and request that the Board of Supervisors review the following issues. A, that the phrase braided California coastal trail segments, as used on page 4.13-9 of the strike-through version of the coastal element and other pages in the Mendocino Town Plan LCP Amendment, be better defined. B, that action S-2.1 on page 4.13-102 of the strike-through version of the coastal element be reviewed to determine if the word not needs to be inserted in Clause B for that clause to read as follows. B, that well production of groundwater will, 1, not, and I have the word not in bold, deplete the groundwater table of contiguous or surrounding uses, comma, and 2, not have a significant direct or cumulative adverse effect on coastal resources. And C, that on page 253 of the strike-through version of the Mendocino Town Zoning Code, the references to the California Department of Fish and Game in paragraph B be changed to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Any other recommendations?
What he said. I move as read out by Matt.
I'll second.
We'll have a roll call.
Commissioner Warner,
Yes.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Knapp,
Yes?
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Kruger,
Yes.
Commissioner Holmkamp.
Yes.
Phew. Great.
Right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for all the hard labor.
Low these
Thank
many
Ms.
years.
Cherry as well. She's, and Nash and other staff.
Feel so embarrassed to throw this stuff out. Okay, are there any matters from staff for us to consider?
No matters from staff.
Any matters from
Yeah, actually, I do have one. I'm wondering if we could, at a future meeting, get a report on the new housing accessory units program that I think is, maybe this is this first year. I don't even know when it's going to be implemented.
If I may, through the chair, there's a couple things that we're working on right now per direction of the board, and one of them is to amend Chapter 2164, which is the section that contains the second unit provision. So one of the things that we're looking at is state law refers to these as accessory residential units. And so what we're looking at is doing an amendment, and that's going to be moving forward. And that would be brought forth to the Planning Commission. So it is, at first it was supposed to be something simple, but now we're looking at a few other changes to make sure that it's consistent across the board. So that is something that will be, coming forward. The other thing that has been brought up during board discussion is whether or not second units could be done in the coastal zone, because the Coastal Commission came out with a memo several months ago about the possibility of second units. And so we need to take a look at that. And last week I was in communication with Down Associates, who does a lot of the long-range planning, and they also serve as MCOG for the housing needs plan. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is the Highway 1 capacity study. And if we're going to do second units in the coastal zone, then one of the things that needs to be updated is the Highway 1 capacity study. So there's a lot of little pieces here and there, and like I said, it started out to be something simple, but the more we look at it, the more moving parts it has to it. So that is something we definitely want to bring to the Planning Commission sooner rather than later, because we do have direction from the board to start looking at updating second units, and it would start with the inland, and then we would be looking at what possibilities could be done in the coastal zone. But that's one of the things that we definitely need to do as part of the long-range efforts, is to look at Highway 1 capacity. The other thing that I'm looking at is any grant funding that may be available through the Coastal Commission or through sustainability planning grants, again, to address this issue of housing in the coastal zone as well. So, and what does that mean? Possibly an LCP amendment. But again, it's a discussion we need to have with the Coastal Commission, and there's a number of things that we're trying to achieve. I know Bill and his staff just basically have been spending a lot of time on this, but one of the things that we also need to do is move the floodplain ordinance to the Coastal Commission, because one of the things that they're looking at is some cleanup language in the LCP. So we need to do an LCP amendment for that. And then we're looking at the housing aspect of it as well, to deal with housing coming after that. So a number of different things that are going on.
Well, that sounds fine. This though, that I'm referring to is a state law that I think is new.
Uh-huh.
Is that
Yes, it's a
what
new,
you're trying to
yes.
conform our plans to these new state requirements?
Yes, it's a state law that became effective the first of the year, that actually last year. And what it does is it doesn't call second units, and it calls them accessory residential units. And the whole idea was to further remove any restrictions from the establishment of these accessory units. And I think a lot of it was not only second units, but there's also what they call junior accessory residential units, which would be things like detached bedrooms and guest cottages. So we're having to take a look at that as well. But the idea is to make these more conforming. We already have removed a lot of the impediments from allowing these from, if we go back to the 1980s where we required use permits, then administrative permits, and now everything's just permitted by a building permit. That's having removed all these impediments. But now the state really wants to recognize all these other junior accessories as well. So that's what we're trying to do, is to try to make the code conforming to state law.
Right, and it was kind of alarming how quickly things could change if it was as simple as that state law appeared to be in the beginning.
And
I
a
mean,
lot of
population increases and
the state is basically looking at trying to address housing, but they're trying to push a lot of these things down to the local jurisdictions. But they came up with these laws that were conceived at the very high level in Sacramento, but a lot of these laws don't really take into account what goes on at the local level. For example, did they really consider the coastal zone and having local jurisdictions amend their LCPs? Probably not. That's why the Coastal Commission had to come out with a memo to address these issues.
so I guess we'll be hearing about it later.
Yes.
That's fine, thanks.
Commissioner Nelson.
So, this was implemented a year or 2 years ago. That was the state law, because I just recently heard something about legislation that maybe is just proposed even to help alleviate, especially the low-income housing.
So the one on the junior accessory units was adopted I want to say it was 2016 to become effective in 17. So that law's been around now for several months. In fact, it's been around since the first of the year. We are just getting to that point of trying to implement it and put it together. There are new pieces of legislation that the state has been also working on in response to the housing affordability shortage in California. So there's some more laws that are coming down the pike as well.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's all
what I heard
centered
about
around
that.
affordability.
And what I would just like to offer the thought is that I think that the coastal zone is the most impacted in our county in terms of affordability. So I kind of hate the idea that they have to wait till after the inland thing. I mean, it just seems like the coastal commission should come up with some sort of a memo of here's how we're going to deal with these local coastal plan amendments, so it isn't so time consuming for everybody. And I just, from a personal survey I did about 20 years ago, I realized that about half the low-income housing, those folks get kicked out in the summer and they go live in the campgrounds, and the houses go to weekly rentals. It's terrible.
In fact, if I can through the chair, this was an item that was discussed at the board level a couple of months ago, and the idea was that we were talking about inclusionary housing and direction on that. And what the board did was they directed staff to look at vacation home rentals, or what I would refer to as short-term rentals. And they started with the coast and then inland. And the idea was that the board felt that these types of, I'll say, conversions or removing this type of long-term housing stock and turning it into short-term was part of the culprit. And so it recently went back to the board because they did request a moratorium on any new short-term rentals. And I'll turn to council, but I believe the votes were not there. In fact, the votes were not there, but I forget what the vote count was. But the support for extending the moratorium was not there. So basically, this item is now, I don't want to use the word dead, but it's on hold.
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski. So the board did not renew the moratorium that had been initially established on vacation rentals, but did provide some direction to staff to continue to work on issues related to second units. And so we will bring forward that as soon as we're able to. And the Planning Commission will see any changes that are made. And I believe Director Gonzalez referred to the Coastal Commission memo on the secondary units. So to the extent we can rely on that and move this forward at one time as opposed to two, that would be ideal.
Yes.
Just two quick comments. I'm on the Mendocino County Foundation Board, and we did like a survey where we met with all the small communities in the county: Anderson Valley, Wallala, Covelo, Laytonville, Willits, and to hear what the issues were, and you know, also as well what they thought were happy things that were going well. The one item that showed up everywhere was housing, shortage of housing, and the problem with housing. Slightly related, we're doing our best in agriculture to help with the low-income housing. We've been working on trying to get agricultural housing on our ranch. And I know Jim Barrett is also working on the coast, trying to get some agricultural housing because of the shortage. We've often, in the years past, relied on single men, and so we could have group housing. But now it's more just families. So we're trying to put in mobile homes, and or you know, what are they? Well, not mobile homes, but yeah, pre-manufactured homes. And it's been very difficult working with the planning department. And one of the issues seems to be the turnover in staff. So we're working with one person, we're told one thing, and then somebody else new comes in and they add something else, and it compounds the problem. So hopefully with our new staffing, we'll have more permanent, and it'll make it easier for those of us in the private sector to work through the system. I know Jim is working with growers, dairymen on the coast, and it's been quite a hurdle for them to get housing for their employees.
If I may respond, it is this director's priority to deal with housing. And again, as you all will recall, I was previously involved with a housing element and a housing element lawsuit, and so I know what it's all about. And so yes, we are stretched thin right now, and it seems like all staff has been, in some cases, oftentimes diverted to cannabis, but we are looking at reviving long-range planning in the department, and part of my goal is to relook at some of these issues as far as housing, and try to work with some of the housing groups that are out there, and try to facilitate whatever housing we can. Everything from multifamily units having priority to anything that brings affordability to the county. And again, yes, we've had a turnover, and yes, it's been difficult to try to deal with that. Hopefully, stability is now coming to the department, because we do have folks that are now been hired and so on, but there is that training process and that coming up to speed. But I say that, myself and senior staff are trying to work with everybody to make sure that we implement those priorities.
When I was director of the Fire Safe Council, I was going around to talk to a lot of these coastal fire departments. The average age in some of these fire departments is like 72. And they all feel that it is because young people can't locate there because they can't find anywhere to live that they can afford for what their job pays. And so I think it's a real matter of public safety in some of these small coastal communities to make them a priority. They have got to figure something out or they're going to have 80-year-olds responding to fires.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not a good situation. So I hope the supervisors will see it that way as well as you. Yes.
And may I comment on the vacation rental issue? Because I've been following that as it was getting ready to go to the board. I hadn't heard about how the vote was, so thank you for that update. I do have a concern coming from District 3 about any extra restrictions on vacation rentals. While I fully understand that we do have a housing crisis that's countywide, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. We're still losing student enrollment up in Laytonville because people can't find housing and they're just leaving the state. They're leaving the county, they're leaving the state. So I see that impacting my community and my district as well. However, I do have a concern about any extra restrictions on vacation rentals because there are a lot of people in District 3 who are looking to shift their land-based income, especially with regards to the changes in the cannabis market. Folks who are saying, you know what, it's too complicated, I'm not well capitalized enough, I would still want to stay on the land and make money. And a lot of folks want to do these small little retreats where they're maybe having like an extra bedroom in their house that they're renting out, or say like a little detached cottage or even a yurt. And they're being told by the planning department that falls into the vacation rental and that requires a major use permit, which is a really big hurdle for folks. And the Inland Zoning Code defines the vacation rental as 3 or more bedrooms or rooms, I believe, 3 or more rooms for rent. So So for a lot of those folks, it's technically not a vacation rental that they want to do. It's something else, but they're kind of being squeezed out of that. And so I don't know if this is something that could be looked at hand in hand with this housing issue going forward, but I did just want to raise that issue. I mean, I think in the Mendocino Town Zoning Code, there is a designation, I think it's a single room, what is it, something or other?
Single unit rental.
Single unit rental. And so some kind of designation like that for inland, I think, could be really helpful at helping to promote that small scale visitor facility in Mendocino County. I don't know if you saw the latest Sunset magazine that just came out this week, but Mendocino County farm stays are front page on Sunset magazine. I mean, this is huge. Visit Mendocino County is paying huge money right now to promote these tiny little 1, 2, and 3 unit farm stays in the county. So I would like to see staff and the board, and to the extent that the Planning Commission can, I would like to see us all find a way to really support that, because it's great land-based income. It brings in TOT for the county, and I would like to see more of that.
So if I may, we will be looking at, again, 2164, and I believe it's L, subsection L, that deals with the room and board aspect of it. We will be looking at a change from the major use permit. We're going to be exploring whether we can do that with a minor use permit or even an administrative permit. So that is the takeaway that we got from the board meeting. So we're going to be looking at a change to the ordinance. So again, it's not as simple as just changing it from a major to a minor, but we're also going to be looking at some of these other things that 1 room, 2 rooms, 3 rooms, and so on. So we are looking at it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it reminds me of often my concern is be careful of what you ask for because of the unforeseen consequences. One of our major incomes is tourism, and so if we try to solve the rental problem, the housing problem, by restricting vacation rentals, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot as far as tourism income.
Go ahead. Did you have a comment, Matt?
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Gadrowski, just one comment on matters from the commission. At a certain point, we need to, if we're going to bring item forward, we can deal with that, but we can't talk too much about an item in particular or topic because it wasn't noticed for this meeting. It's just being brought up. So I think we will be bringing, the board has given direction to at least reduce the major use permit to a minor, and planning staff will be bringing that forward at a future meeting.
His policeman hat just came out.
There we go. So, on that note, we will move along in our agenda to the approval of the March 2nd, 2017 minutes. Any comments or corrections?
I just had 2. They were very well done, and they're minor. Just need to find it. There it is. Okay. On page 3, the paragraph under matters from staff from Mary Lynn Hunt, the 1, 2, 3, 4th sentence down at the end. She learned from the conference that there is a lot of planning department employee turnover. If we could change "are" to "is" throughout the state. And then the last paragraph under matters from staff, Ms. Hunt discussed meeting dates, if there could be an S on date, and noted it would depend on the current workload. And that would be it. Very nicely done.
So do we have a motion?
I'll move approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? No. Okay. With that, I believe we are,
I'll move adjournment.
okay, all opposed, duck.
Good job. Chairman?
Well, that was